Hello, friends. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Banan. This evening with Bhante Sudaso. So he will be sharing some words of Dhamma on Bodhicitta. I believe that is the topic. And we will start with some chanting. So we'll be chanting the Ratana Sutta. And if you wish to chant with us, there is a link in the live chat to the sutta. And after that, we will be doing some meditation together. So Bhante will be guiding us in meditation. And after that, again, he will be sharing some words of Dhamma. So if you have any questions at any time, you can write them in the live chat and Bhante will answer them later. And hello to Marielle, good to see you. And hello to Jens, and hello to all our other friends who are haven't checked in yet, but I can see you as a little number on the screen. All right, so I'll pass it on to Bhante.
So we'll chant the Ratana Sutta together. So please join in as best you can. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Yani bhutani samagatani bummani vayani vantareke. Sabbe bhuta sumana bhavantu atopi sakacha sunantu vasitam. Tasmahi bhutani sameta sabbe vetam karota manusiya pajaya. Devacharato chaharanti evalim tasmahine rakata apamatam. Yam kinchivitam midavahuram vasage suvayam ratanam panitam. Nano samam gati tathagatena idampi buddhe ratanam panitam. Etena sacena suvati hotu. Kayam viragam namatam panitam yadajjaga sakyamuni samahito. Natena dhammena samati kinchi idampi dhamme ratanam panitam. Etena sacena suvati hotu. Yam buddha seto parivannayi suchim samadhimanam tarikanyamaho. Samadhina tena samona vijjati dampi dhamme ratanam panitam. Etena sacena suvati hotu. Ye bhugala tasatam pasata chattari etani yugani honti. Te dakineya sugata sasavaka ete sudinnani mahapalani. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sacena suvati hotu. Yesu payota manasa dalhena nikamino gotamasa sanami. Te patipata amatam vigaiha laghamudani buddhim punjamana. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sacena suvati hotu. Yatinda kilo patavim sitosia tatu bhivate via sampakampiyo. Tatupamam sabburisam vadami yo arya sacchani avechapasati. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu. Ye ariya sacchani vibhavayanti gambhira panyena sudesitani. Kinchapi te onti busapamatana te bhavam matamam adiyanti. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu. Sahavasada sampadaya taya sudhamma jahita bhavanti. Sakaya deti vichikechitancha silabatam vapiyadati kinchi. Chatuhapaye hichave pamuto chachabhitanani ababbokatum. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu. Kinchapi sokam mam karoti papakam kayena vacha udaceta Avabbo soda sapati chadaya avabbata dirtapada sabutam. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu. Vanapagumbe yata pusita gegem hanamase patamasmin gemhe. Tatupamam dhammavaram adesayi nibbanagamim paramam hitaya. Idampi buddhe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu. Varo varanyo varado vararo anutaro dhammavaram adesayi. Idampi buddhe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu. Kinam puranam navam nati sambhavam virata citta yatike bhavasim. Te kina bija viruli chandani banti gira yatayam paripo. Idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu. Yani bhutani samagatani mummani vayani vantaleke. Tathagatam deva manusa pujitam buddham namassama suvati hotu. Yani bhutani samagatani mummani vayani vantaleke. Tathagatam deva manusa pujitam dhammam namassama suvati hotu. Yani bhutani samagatani mummani vayani vantaleke. Tathagatam deva manusa pujitam samham namassama suvati hotu. Etena sacha vajjena dukkhavupasamantu te. Etena sacha vajjena bhayavupasamantu te. Etena sacha vajjena rogavupasamantu te. Okay, now please get in meditation posture and we'll do some meditation practice. And settling into position. Once you're settled in, make a firm determination to let the body be still. A firm determination to not deliberately move the body at all for the whole period of meditation. Soften your face, relaxing all the muscles in the face, especially around the eyes and jaw. Let a slight smile come to your lips. And take a few long, slow, deep breaths. Letting each breath sweep all the tension from your body and all the thoughts from your mind. Allow your breath to return to its natural rhythm. And bring attention within your body. Clearly feeling the whole body sitting still, a mass of sensations, a constellation of sensations appearing and vanishing in each moment. Just closely watching this fireworks show of sensations constantly popping in and out of being. Paying attention to the coming and going of body sensation, the arising and ceasing of body sensation, the constant change of body sensation. Anytime something seems to be solid, look more closely. Notice the change, the impermanence, the insubstantiality. Notice the ephemeral, ghostly, mirage-like quality of everything within the body. Letting the illusion of solidity melt away. Like chips of ice in hot water. Feeling that even the perimeter of the body is constantly changing, insubstantial, undefined. Gradually letting go of the illusion of a clearly defined, separate body. Feeling this fluid mass of ever-changing sensation. No solid, stable, persistent objects to be found anywhere. Just a field of ever-changing sensation, coming and going. Okay, you can relax your posture. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So, friends, this evening I've been instructed by She Who Instructs to talk about Bodhicitta. So, Bodhicitta is a compound of two words. Bodhi means awakening, which in Buddhism usually refers particularly to attaining enlightenment, usually attaining full enlightenment, and chitta, which means mind. So bodhicitta literally means awakening mind, but usually here chitta is really used to refer not to mind in the sense of the mind as the unit which thinks and feels and so on, but rather attitude or inclination. So it's the inclination towards awakening. It's the attitude of wanting to attain awakening. It's the aspiration for awakening. So it's mind in a more specific sense. Like in the way in English we say, well, I have a mind to go for a walk, or I'm of two minds about the subject. So that's how the word mind is being used here in the word bodhicitta. So it's, I have a mind to attain awakening. That's what we mean here. I have the aspiration, the mission, the inclination, the strong motivation to attain awakening. And bodhicitta is a critical element of Buddhist practice. If we don't have the aspiration for awakening, then we are not likely to put forth the degree of dedication, persistence, resolute effort, and renunciation that's necessary for awakening. So without bodhicitta, without this genuine, sincere aspiration for awakening, then our Buddhist practice will tend to always be somewhat half-hearted. It might get some nice results. We might be 10% happier or something along those lines. We might have slightly less stress. We might be able to reduce our Zoloft prescription from 2 pills to 1 pill, or cut down a little bit on the anxiety meds or something. And that's all fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just still within the circle of samsara. It's not a long-term lasting solution. It's just navigating towards the slightly nicer side of samsara. And if that's how somebody wants to use Buddhist practice, that's perfectly fine. The Buddha, in the suttas, the Buddha actually gives basically 2 parallel paths. And you can quite reasonably say that both of these paths are Buddhist. So one is the path to full enlightenment, and the other is the path to pleasant conditions. And there's a certain amount of overlap because the path to pleasant conditions involves practicing morality and generosity. First and foremost, morality and generosity. And that produces pleasant effects both in this life and in future lives. And if you want really pleasant effects, then it's also good to mix in some mind training methods, some degree of samadhi practice and insight practice to get even nicer results, both in this life and in future lives. So that's the path. Commonly, it's described as the path to heaven, the path to heavenly rebirth. But it also, again, produces pleasant results in this life and doesn't necessarily result in rebirth in a heaven realm. It can also just result in rebirth as a pleasant human life. But the path to full awakening, it does involve the same qualities, the same practices of morality and generosity, but the mind training practices are much more intensive because we're aiming not just at producing ordinary good karma that leads to having a bigger car and a fatter bank account and a nicer spouse, but rather we're aiming at completely eradicating the subconscious tendencies towards desire, aversion, delusion, and self-centeredness. That's a much bigger project. That's a much more involved project that requires a much more finely honed and trained mind. And that requires a much larger stockpile of parami, a much larger stockpile of merit, much larger and stronger stockpile of good karma. So it's not an easy thing, and it's not a short-term project. It's something which requires patience, requires persistence, it requires a long-term view. And very often it involves passing up short-term pleasure. And this is another one of the critical dividing lines between the limited path of slightly improving our conditions in samsara versus the unlimited path of attaining full awakening. One of the critical distinguishing factors is that the path to full awakening involves renunciation. So of course you can use a limited amounts of renunciation as part of your path to pleasant samsara. It helps, actually it does help. But the kind of renunciation that leads to awakening is complete renunciation. The willingness to let go of absolutely everything. Not settling for any happiness less than the highest. That's renunciation. Letting go of every happiness less than the highest. And the highest happiness is, of course, complete enlightenment, full awakening, Bodhi. So Bodhicitta then is setting our sights on the highest happiness. The Buddha said, Nibbānang paramam sukham. Enlightenment is the highest happiness. So Bodhicitta is saying, I'm not going to settle for less than the best. I'm not going to settle for just bouncing between pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain. I'm not going to settle for just having a slightly bigger piece of the feces pie. That's not what I'm after. I want the highest. I want the best. I want the unsurpassable. I want that which, once attained, can never be lost. This is bodhicitta, the aspiration for highest attainment, the aspiration for unshakable attainment, the aspiration for full awakening. The most commendable, the most praiseworthy, the most desirable thing in all reality. That's what we set our mind for. That's what we point our mind towards. This is bodhicitta. Bodhicitta, however, is not an easy thing to produce when one is mired in the world. So there's a number of things that need to be done in order to produce bodhicitta. And this, once again, is where we get into practices which the ordinary half-hearted practitioner is usually not terribly interested in. One of the critical qualities that we cultivate in Pali is called samvega. And samvega is one of those Pali words that's difficult to translate succinctly. There's no single English word that closely matches samvega. It's difficult to translate it with anything less than a paragraph, in fact. Even saying it in one sentence is a little challenging. Samvega is it's similar to nibbida. So nibbida is disenchantment. Nibbida is recognizing that there's nothing worth seeking in samsara. Nibbida literally means not seeking. So nibbida is when we see that there's nothing in samsara that's worth pursuing. Similarly, samvega is when one starts to recognize the sadness of samsara. We start to see what a tawdry, pathetic place samsara is. It's kind of like if you go to a haunted house. So around Halloween time, there starts to be these little like miniature theme parks, which we call haunted houses. I never actually set foot in one in my entire life, by the way, but my brother used to go to them. And I have some friends who would go to haunted houses. And the way they would describe it is that if the haunted house is designed really well to give you a sense of immersion, it's actually terrifying. But my brother was talking about one time when he was going through a haunted house, and at first he was kind of like, oh. And then at some point he started to see the cracks around the edges of the facade. He started to see behind the display. He started to see where the actors were coming out. He started to see that the creepy things were just decorations. And of course, it had been that way all along. It's just that in the beginning, he was falling into the trap that the set designers had made. He was willingly, of course, willingly falling into the trap that the set designers had made. But once he could no longer ignore the shallowness of the haunted house experience, then it lost all its power. Once he could no longer ignore the fact that it was just actors and movie sets and things which had no ability to harm him, then it lost all its power, and it just became amusing to him, actually. It went from scary to funny. And he went through the rest of the haunted house having a blast, laughing at how goofy and silly the whole thing was. So that's a little bit what it's like when we cultivate samvega. In that before samvega, we take samsara seriously. We think samsara is this place where if you play your cards right, you can get like a big house and fancy things and really nice food and really nice partner and really nice everything, and it'll be great and you'll be so happy and everything will be wonderful. But samvega is when you recognize that that's just a bunch of fakeness. There's no depth to it. There's no substance to it. Another example that Bhante Nyanananda gave is it's like a movie theater. When you're in the movie theater and the lights are off and all you can see is the movie on the screen, then it's easy to get sucked into the story, wrapped up in the characters and the events. But then if somebody turns on the lights, then suddenly you realize that actually you're just a person sitting in a movie theater with a bunch of other people. And the image on the movie screen, even though you can still see it, it becomes washed out and faded and pale. So it's no longer immersive, which means you're no longer sucked into the character and the stories. This also is what samvega is like. We start to realize that samsara is this pathetic, sad, hollow, shallow experience which offers no real comfort or solace. We start to lose interest in it. We lose interest in getting the nice house and the nice car and the nice job, and we lose interest in the fame and the respect and the wealth, and we lose interest in the partner, and we lose interest in the sexuality, and we lose interest in the entertainment. We see how shallow and pathetic and pointless it all is. And at this point, if you don't have an understanding of spiritual practice, then you'll likely just fall into cynical depression and wallow your days away in misery. Those of us, however, have access to the Buddhist teachings know that, yes, samsara is a pathetic, sad, worthless place. However, there's an alternative, which is to attain enlightenment. It takes a lot of effort and time, but what else are you going to do? keep trying to get a bigger slice of the feces pie once you realize it's made out of feces? Is that actually what you're going to do? Of course not. You can no longer fool yourself that it's a pie worth pursuing. You know what it is now. So once you see samsara for what it is, then samvega arises, nibbida arises, disenchantment. And the mind starts to turn towards awakening. So one of the ways of cultivating bodhicitta is to cultivate samvega, cultivate nibbida, to actively turn your attention to the patheticness of samsara, to the hollowness of ordinary worldly goals, the pointlessness of pursuing ordinary worldly goals. Seeing how little comfort and solace there is in ordinary worldly goals. Again, things like sensuality, even things like creativity, art, music, things which we think are so wonderful and special and sublime. They're just another part of the feces pie. They're some of the more attractive side, admittedly, but still, it's attractive feces. So we need to remember that. And again, this is part of why so few people attain enlightenment. Is they keep saying, well, okay, I get it. I get the whole like money and wealth thing is pathetic and shallow, but art is sublime and enriching and uplifting. No, it's feces. Accept it. Because as long as you think that art and music and all that is worth pursuing, you will never escape samsara. Ever. You will just keep circling around in the cesspool, pretending that it's worth swimming in the cesspool. So you need to come to grips with the fact that every single thing in samsara is worthless. If you do that, then bodhicitta will come up strong and powerful. And you will set your sights on awakening, and you will not stop moving forward until you become a Buddha. And I say, sadhu, 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 may it be so. And then you can show others the path as well. Which leads to another major way of practicing bodhicitta, cultivating bodhicitta. And this is through the cultivation of compassion. So we recognize that there are countless beings who do not know the Dhamma. There are countless beings who do not understand that unconditional happiness is possible. There are countless beings who are mired in defilement and delusion and do not realize they can free themselves from that defilement and delusion. We recognize that all these beings are suffering needlessly because they have not been shown the way to purify their own minds. And when we see their suffering, then we wish for them to be free of that suffering. And we wish to help them become free of that suffering. But we recognize our own limitation. We recognize that because we are not free of defilement and delusion, our ability to help others is also limited. And we see that if we attain full enlightenment, then we can be of much more benefit to others. We can be so much more helpful to others. If we purify our own minds, then we can help other people purify their minds. Just like the Buddha attained enlightenment, and as a result, he has helped millions upon millions of people over the past centuries. 2,500 years, he's helped hundreds of millions of people. He's helped them find a path out of suffering, a path to happiness, a path to wisdom. We can do that too. So this is another way of cultivating bodhicitta, is to recognize the pervasive suffering of the world and to see that if we purify our own minds, then we can help those who are suffering. We can be of so much more benefit as an awakened being than as an unawakened being. It's another way of cultivating bodhicitta. Another way of cultivating bodhicitta is to focus on the blessings of the spiritual life, to focus on the happiness and joy that comes from practicing the Buddha's teachings. So see however much you've practiced so far, and see the happiness and contentment and serenity and joy that's come from that practice. So if you've been practicing morality, well, see the happiness and joy that's come from morality. If you've been practicing samadhi, we'll see the happiness and joy that's come from samadhi. If you've been cultivating wisdom, we'll see the happiness and joy that's come from cultivating wisdom. And of course, it will be limited happiness, limited joy, limited serenity because of our limited practice. And then we think, well, I really want more of this happiness and serenity and joy stuff. How do I get more of it? By practicing more. So this is using our greed mind. So the first method is using our aversion to cultivate bodhicitta. Our aversion towards the disgusting, pathetic shallowness of samsara. We're like, look at this crap hole. Samsara sucks. I hate it. I want to be free of this crappy place. That's using our aversion to cultivate the aspiration for enlightenment, to build up bodhicitta. The second method is using compassion. We see the suffering of living beings and we want to uplift them. We want to help them get free of their suffering. And the third method is using our greed. We're like, I like pleasure. Pleasure's great. And the greatest pleasure comes through practicing the Dhamma. So much happiness when you practice the Dhamma. So much pleasure, so much bliss. Yay, bliss and happiness from the Dhamma. And so then our greed mind is like, I want more of this pleasure stuff. It's great. So let's do more of that Sila, Samadhi, and Panya stuff. Yes, happiness. Woo. So that's using our greed mind to cultivate the path towards awakening. And you might be saying, well, what about delusion? How does delusion fit into this? Well, it actually fits mostly under the compassion part, to be perfectly honest, because compassion arises from the delusion that there are separate beings in the first place. In order to think, I want to save other beings, you have to have the delusion of self and other. So ultimately, we're actually talking about greed, hatred, and delusion, because that's what we start with. We don't start with a stack of paramitas. We don't start with a stack of spiritual perfections, not unless you've cultivated them through countless lifetimes, of course. So we don't start with a stack of paramis. We start with a stack of defilements. And we've got to start with this stack of defilements and find some way to build a vehicle to awakening out of it. So this is what we do. We take all that greed, hatred, and delusion, and we ask ourselves, how can I reshape this? Reshape it from a vehicle of suffering into a vehicle of awakening. And this is the cultivation of bodhicitta. It's using our greed to point the mind towards freedom from greed. It's using our aversion to point the mind towards freedom from aversion. And it's using our delusion to point the mind towards freedom from delusion. This is how you can build bodhicitta, which is unassailable. This is how you can build bodhicitta, which cannot be broken. This is how you can build a mind which aims unerringly at the highest goal of the spiritual life. So those are my thoughts for the evening. I don't really have anything else to say. So at this time, if there's any questions or comments, we can go ahead and take some questions and comments.
Thank you, Bante. And we have some comments from Elaine. Yummy feces pie. Hello, Elaine. Good to see you. Yes, we did have a meaningful retreat. It was great. It's also great to see you all. Gita says, very nice analysis, Bante, with the haunted house. And we have some other friends who have joined us in the meanwhile. Hello, Mark. Oh, hello, Lilia, who says, I missed you guys so much.
Oh, that's very sweet.
And hello, Melinda. Good to see you. And Bhavani has a question, but it's unrelated. So it's a meditation question.
Well, if there's no other questions, we can take an unrelated question.
Maybe we can go back to it because there is a question actually on the subject matter. So maybe we can get back to it later. And hi to Jacqueline and John and Gabriella. Hello, good to see you. All right. So Marielle is asking, but even if it is shallow and pathetic, we cannot become unaware of samsara and our surroundings. I have met people who become obsessed with their own spirituality and in that obsession get to a point of arrogance and disconnection, thinking they are above the unconscious world.
Yeah, that's also another mistake. Yeah, samsara is pathetic. There's no getting around it. But the way out is through, as they say. So there's no escaping samsara without understanding samsara. And in order to understand it, you have to look it right in the eyes without flinching, without turning away. So those who think that they can cultivate a spiritual practice by turning a blind eye to the world are only cultivating more delusion. They're only cultivating ignorance. It's what's called spiritual bypassing. It's using our spiritual practice to try to ignore suffering, to try to ignore our own defilements, to try to ignore the suffering of others, which is not Buddhism. Buddhism is not about ignoring suffering. It's not about ignoring our defilements. It's about facing that suffering directly so that we can understand it. In the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, so what's traditionally called the first teaching of the Buddha, it's actually not the first teaching of the Buddha, but it's one of the first. In the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha says there is dukkha, and dukkha must be fully known. He doesn't say there is dukkha and you should actively ignore it while focusing on your practice. That's not what he says. He says there is dukkha and dukkha must be fully known. Parinyeya, fully known. It must be fully understood. And the way you fully understand it is by looking directly at it. So yeah, your friend who you mentioned does not understand Buddhism. It's not quite getting it. Yeah, you can't turn away from the world. You have to look at it in order to be free of it.
And Gabriella is asking, how is bodhicitta different in different traditions?
Well, ultimately, bodhicitta, once again, is just the aspiration for awakening. What you'll find different in different traditions is what elements are emphasized. So in the Theravada tradition, there tends to be a strong emphasis on the nibbida element, the disenchantment element, as a spur to awakening. And in the Mahayana tradition, there tends to be a strong emphasis on the compassion element. But realistically, actually, you'll find all of these elements in every Buddhist tradition. It tends to just be a matter of what's emphasized.
Right, and Elaine says about not losing the attainments. Should we be dedicating our merit after we perform a virtuous act?
Doesn't hurt. Dedicating merit just cultivates more merit. So it doesn't hurt. It only helps. As far as not losing progress, the main way is to just keep practicing resolutely and sincerely. That's the main way that we don't lose progress. Okay.
And Gabriella says, what is the best way you find in practice that tunes up the various parts of bodhicitta that isn't just the four boundless states of mind, brahmaviharas?
I don't think I didn't actually mention the brahmaviharas at all in connection with bodhicitta. In fact, I don't really think of them as being much connected to bodhicitta, except to the extent that it can fuel the compassionate motive for bodhicitta. But otherwise, I don't think of them as being much related. But as for what you need to focus on to tune up your bodhicitta, well, that depends on what you're struggling with. Depends on where your problem areas are. So you have to ask yourself, where do I get stuck in samsara? And focus on working in that area. And basically, there's two ways that you work with a sticking point. One is to oppose it, and the other is to redirect it. So for example, greed is opposed by practicing asubha, contemplating the drawbacks of samsara, directly opposes greed. Redirecting greed would be something like directing your mind towards the pleasure of samadhi and the pleasure of contentment. So that's just pointing your greed towards wholesome things. So those are the two main ways that we work. We work either with opposition or redirection. But as to which method you use and what to focus on, well, that depends upon what you're dealing with. So you need to look at your own mind and ask yourself what's most relevant to you.
Great. Right, and actually there are no more questions as of now, so perhaps I can go back to Bhavani's question, who says, Namaste, do you practice color, light, space meditations? How are they helpful to the mind?
I do not practice them. Yeah, you're referring to the kasina meditations. I do not practice them. Those particular meditation methods are fraught with peril and difficulty. And they don't work particularly well for most people. So they're not generally recommended. Generally speaking, kasina practices are taught by a small handful of teachers to the small percentage of people who really benefit from those practices. I am not in either category. I don't teach them and I don't practice them. So generally speaking, most people should not practice kasina meditation. It's not recommended. If you really feel that you need to practice kasina or you feel a really strong affinity and connection with it, then find a teacher of kasina meditation and talk with them about whether it's actually suitable for your personality and your conditions. And odds are 9 out of 10 that they'll tell you, no, it's not good for you. But there is that other 1 out of 10. There are people for whom kasina meditation is just right. So I've heard.
And Jacqueline is asking, as a householder, does our practice in this life help in a future lifetime?
Yeah, absolutely. Every good thing you do in this life will help in future lives. And every bad thing you do will hinder in future lives. Be careful.
That also is true for monastics.
Yes.
And Gabriella is asking, what are ways to break obstructions to the aspiration to awaken?
Well, once again, you have to first identify what your obstructions are. And once you identify what your obstructions are, look to see what the underlying defilement is. And then, as I said earlier, either cultivate a practice which directly opposes the underlying defilement, or cultivate practices which redirects that defilement back towards the path. Okay?
So adding, since you mentioned there's suppression and redirection.
I actually said opposition, not suppression. There's a big difference. Suppression implies that you're just temporarily stopping something, but that it will come back shortly. Opposition optimally is wearing something down to make it weaker and potentially even destroying it. For example, if you really clearly see that something is undesirable, then you will stop desiring it. That's not suppression, that's opposition, to the point of completely destroying the underlying defilement. So in Abhidhamma terms, that's called dasanena pahatava dhamma, things to be abandoned through seeing with wisdom.
Great. It's like, okay, seeing. And I think that seems that that's all for this evening. There's lots of sweet messages of how people missed us.
Oh, we missed you too.
But you'll have more and more of Bante.
And more of Aya. She's giving a talk tomorrow.
But tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., Bante will be giving Sutta study again. So the second part of the Chanki Sutta, and on Friday morning, also the third and last part of the Chanki Sutta. So you can tune in at that time. Then tomorrow, I will apparently be talking about something. And on Friday, if you have any questions in general on Dhamma or related to Dhamma, you can bring them up to Monk Chat, and Bhante and I will try our best to answer all your questions. All right, so I think that's all for this evening, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. And if you are local to the monastery or somewhat local, this Saturday, we will start meditation, outdoor meditation here at the monastery. So on the lawn. So you're welcome to come and join us at 7 p.m. on Saturday. All right. Well, we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And have a great night.